Hi. The original title of our working group was actually The Intersection of Systems Modeling and Classical Simulation. But what we actually wound up talking about was combining heterogeneous models. And since that's one of the top issues that surfaced, we decided to title the talk that way. This is perhaps obvious, but the most fundamental reason why we need to combine heterogeneous models is because we deal all the times with systems that are made up of qualitatively dissimilar pieces. This occurs just naturally in engineered systems and biological systems. Oh, by the way, Joe, I didn't get the memo that this is supposed to be limited to engineered systems. And also, in the context of modeling for engineering, even if the system itself is more or less homogeneous, if you need to model its interactions with its environment, if its environment is dissimilar from the system, right there you have a heterogeneous combined system that you need to model. That's the most fundamental reason. It also arises when you're modeling multi-fidelity systems. So even if it's all more or less the same physics or engineering issues, if you're modeling one part of it at one level of fidelity, another part at a different level, you need to know how to combine those things. I'm not going to I'll go through these fairly quickly, but to give you the breadth and the sort of things we were trying to tackle, all kinds of engineered systems, unless they're trivial. I mean, any sort of integrated system, you have optics, you have power, you have structural mechanics. All these things come in, and they cannot be treated separately. And increasingly, that's the case. I mean, in order to deliver the kinds of products we need to do, we need to simultaneously deal with all of these issues. And we see that nature works the same way. All sorts of complex systems. If you go in the microscope and look at how they're all torn apart, this is the only way, in fact, we found to deal with complex problems, both nature and humanity. This is how we do it. We develop these complex things, we divide and conquer, and in the course of dividing and conquering, we're often introducing heterogeneity. We have different things that your skin, your nervous system, your muscular system, your skeletal system, they all operate in different ways. As I mentioned, systems plus their environments, which can include other systems. That's why I chose this particular image. So we have the scuba divers, we have the fish, we have the coral, but they're also within this liquid environment which mediates the interactions among all of them. So you need to be able to model all of these things to address fundamental issues. How should I design the scuba gear? So that's all just to sort of set the stage. And finally, yeah, I should say, and as you go up in scale, as you're addressing broader problems, inevitably heterogeneity comes in that way, in that form. And so when you consider our world as a whole, we have a wide variety. So that's just sort of to set the stage. That's why we're grappling with these issues. So the mission statement that we came up with, which would correspond to vision in the other briefings, was ideally, we'd like to find a single, well-integrated approach that would enable us to model any kind of a system at any level of fidelity that may be required to investigate whatever systems are of interest. Now that may sound like magic or wishful thinking, or it may sound like the wrong idea, because obviously there are different approaches that you use to model structures and electrical systems and all this. I'm the one who came up with this statement, and maybe just because I'm stubborn, everybody else signed off on it. My thought was not that you have to use only the approach that works in an integrated way to describe the entire system. You can have domain-specific languages, domain-specific tools that work well within that tool. But when you want to bring these different aspects of the systems together, you don't want to glue one piece to another. You don't want to add in the whole n by m complexity of how do we make these different pieces talk. Instead, you want to have an overall conceptual model and ultimately a software framework that guides you in how do I bring the pieces together. Try to cover this a little bit just with the slides, but the kinds of systems that we want to be able to model will guide us in defining the requirements that we need to fit into this general scheme. We want to model cyber-physical and mechatronic systems. That right there involves a whole large variety of effects. Increasingly, software computers, computer networks are driving the requirements of many of the classes of products we deliver now. Richard Riff at the first ASSESS conference went into some detail about how in the process of engineering an automobile, the sheer number of individual technical requirements that you have to track has over not very many years increased by an order of magnitude from what it had been, and all of the new requirements related to software, computers, computer networks, sensors, it's all in the electronics and the software. So that's why we highlight these. Biological systems, medical devices. So even if you're doing engineering decisions, you need to, the environment can be amazingly complicated. I mean, if you're trying to build a little device to go swim down somebody's arteries and clear out their arterial plaque, you've got to model those biological systems, large-scale systems, et cetera. I'm going to make this march a little bit, but anything, that's how broad we want to get. Besides the general, being able to model all sorts of things, of course, we'd like it to be easy to use. Good standards and widely accepted standards are critical because we're never going to do 100 different solutions. The only way we're going to be able to bring these things together is if we have standards that people adopt across widely different communities. VV&A, uncertainty quantification, people have already talked about. To make this stuff useful, it has to be there. And libraries of accredited components. You're already starting to see this in the Modelica community right now, where there's increasingly because you have good standards, people are encouraged to invest their time and energy in building up component libraries, which are then available for others to use. They don't have to start from scratch, so you can go out and just grab these things. Major issues, the need to break down or bridge silos. How do we bring together the efforts that are taking place in all these different domains? That's basically the same issue we've been talking about. A lot of this is repetition. The need to find a common understanding or a top-level abstraction layer. It's a way of bringing things together. Need for standards just for communication of information. And those are standards at different levels. There's things like hierarchical data format, things like this, but then you need to invest in how do we keep track of units, all this. I mean, the standardization is going to be an ongoing activity for a long time. Of course, it would help if there was money and momentum behind these things rather than just wishes. And there are some very good standardization efforts already underway, and FMI being a very conspicuous example of this. And this is very good. At the same time, they're very far from complete. They're trying to address a particular subset of the problems that we need to address to really pull these models together, which is great. It's that subset, but we need to tackle the whole problem. So over the last, in recent years, the major things where we've made conspicuous progress, Modelica and the notion of, quote, a causal simulation is, in my view, first, from a technical standpoint, a major step forward from some tools such as Simulink, System Build, some of the earlier, quote, causal models, but also the fact that it's an open standard, there are free versions, and it's developing momentum among the community. That's very important. Multiphysics simulation tools like COMSOL pull multiple domains. Cloud-based simulation lets us pull the resources to bear without having to have our own processor farms. We've already talked about some of the other stuff. I would be happy with anyone that's interested in about the auto-generated surrogate models, all this stuff. This is a particular interest of mine, as well as the flexible simulation frameworks. Can't really get into that here, but it's a whole other talk. Happy to talk tonight. What more is needed? We need to, already the FMI standardization movement, there's already work underway. There are people doing their PhD dissertations, they're working on this. There are already plans to incorporate differential algebraic equations, partial differential equations, as opposed to, the current standard just supports ordinary differential equations. Everybody knows it needs to be made better. That will be a significant step forward just by itself. We need better solvers that can support this, these more general couplings and including delay equations, but and DAs of arbitrary orders. These just arise as you're pulling together big models, and there's not enough work being done in this area. Again, the last couple topics I'll be happy to talk about offline. I just don't want to use up the time here. The priorities we identified as a group were cyber-physical systems, getting this common understanding, a top-level abstraction layer, sharing information, and enabling the design and development of robust systems. And again, I talk about simulation tools. Recommendations. There needs to be a big emphasis, we all concurred, on making the existing standards better, and then coming up with new standards as we find new ways to address the additional issues. How do we integrate systems level tools like the 0D and 1D tools with CAD and CAM tools? The standards aren't there right now, but we both need to come up with the methods and then standardize around them. We need to adopt best practices. If we don't do VV&A, uncertainty quantification, we won't get the kind of confidence that is needed at the CXO level. And again, the developing libraries of accredited component models will be important for general utility. Questions?
Do you have any questions for Steve? We've got time for 1 or 2 questions. No questions for Steve. Oh, Keith has one.
I just wanted to make the comment that when you think this stuff through, it's important to realize that once you build this, it's reusable. So if you can build something, for example, describes an automobile, you can reuse that over and over again and improve your capability.
Yeah, heavily agree. I mentioned the Modelica components. If you Google the Modelica libraries, the wealth of what people are developing there is really fantastic. Nobody else?
Okay, thank you, Steve.